Hello and welcome to another Star Wars: Old Republic guide. In this guide I'm going to be talking about the tanking class on a Juggernaut or Guardian. So we're going to be looking at it right now from the point of view of the Imperial side as an Immortal Juggernaut. It would be Defense Guardian on the Republic side. Why do I like this class? Well, this is the first tanking class I learned. I liked it in general. It's got fairly good just passive damage mitigation. It's really straightforward to play with a priority system. Maybe not quite as easy as some of the other classes to play. But yeah, it's great at single target threat. It's not quite as good at AoE threat though. And some of the changes to 7.0, well, I don't play it quite as much as I used to, sadly. One of the big problems that I find with 7.0 is they've taken away all of our mobility, but you still have the ability to force choke things. So we've got that going for us. So let's talk about stats and gearing. What do you want to get? And we're going to look at this purely from a tanking perspective. We don't want to be looking at this from the point of view of where you can squeeze out additional DPS stats on your tank. That is a very viable thing as you become a more experienced player. One of the things that you want to do is try and get yourself purple Rakata gear if possible, and if you can't, you can stick with the blue Supreme or Clumai gear, totally fine. Get it to the maximum item rating you can get. For blue gear that would be 326, and for purple gear that's going to be 330. So right away, we do not need any accuracy as a tank. We get bonus accuracy of an additional 10%. Generally, we're not going to get any alacrity either because we're looking at a damage mitigation build and not a DPS focused build. Same thing is going to go for critical. All of the stats that we can control with the gear, we're going to be looking at our absorb and shield. We're going to get a lot of defense stats anyways, and all your augments are going to be absorb or shield. How do we want our stat distribution to work? Scroll down to your defense section and look at your percentages here for shield chance and shield absorption. I would say as a minimum, you want to get 40% shield chance on this class. I like running closer to 45%, and I know some people who run even higher than that. What are we going to be wanting to pick up for legendaries? Well, if you want that damage mitigation legendary, you're going to pick up the force resistance package, which gives you 3% damage reduction, as well as giving you more tanking stats. And I highly suggest picking this one up, period. Retaliator package is just so much fun. Retaliation or riposte has no cooldown. Ever since I got this one, I've been enjoying it so much. Make sure you pick this one up first as it's just so much fun. For the tactical, we're probably still going to be using Grit Teeth. They've changed it now so that it reduces the cooldown of Saber Ward, and I'm actually liking it a lot. You also can pick up Leviathan's Hide for kind of an AoE defensive situation, or you can pick up Horde Makashi something or other if you can't have Grit Teeth, as that one will give you some additional damage reduction when using Retaliation. For our relics, we're not going to be using relics that have a % chance of doing something. You're just going to be using relics that give you straight up absorption rating or shield rating, depending on what you need. Alright, so let's take a look at what we want to do with our ability tree choices. As you can see, up on the left we've got the Immortal, and up on the right we've got the Republic Defense. So I'm going to talk you through the Imperial side right now, and just take a look over at the other side if you're curious about what to do on the Republic side. So level 23, our first choice is going to be through strength. 27, not really many great choices here, so I just picked sweeping slash most of the time. 39 though, crushing rage is super OP. This is amazing. It's 10% damage reduction that you provide to yourself and everybody around you. Additionally, if you're looking for something that does a little bit more in AoE situations damage-wise, critical blow would be a great choice. 43, we're taking War Machine. This is just the best one in general. Now, there may be some situations though where you want to take Mark for Death instead. There's a bit of a tooltip error here on the Imperial side. If we look at the Republic side, you'll see that it actually heals you for 1% of your maximum health as well. But the problem is these targets have to be taunted, so generally it's just so hard to pull off because of having to taunt a target. 51, we want to be taking Warmonger. Getting attack reduces the cooldown of force charge, just because there's really not much else that's worth taking in this tree for player versus environment situations. 64, take War Master. It allows your sub 30 attack to be used. Level 68 is where they really screw with us and they're really mean to us. So you have to pick between your Mad Dash, your Saber Reflect, and your Intimidating Roar. Generally, you're going to be needing Mad Dash or Saber Reflect. There are a lot of situations where Saber Reflect is useless. It's not a good ability. So I generally take Mad Dash. Mad Dash is good because you're always going to mitigate damage while dashing, and it gives you extra mobility as well. This class has become so slow, it's so annoying to run around on this class. When we look at 73, generally you're going to be taking through Passion so that you get your enraged defense, your self-heal up a little bit more often. Alright, so there's your ability tree choices. Here's what I've got set up right now. One thing I do want to point out with loadouts is it's really good to create a loadout for all of the choices between Intimidating Roar, Mad Dash, and Saber Reflect. That way, when you swap that one thing, you don't have to worry about it showing up in a random place on your bar and having to move it to the correct spot. Okay, let's take a look at some of the key abilities that you're going to be taking as a Immortal tank or Defense Guardian. These are the abilities that are not part of your main rotation, and yeah, let's talk about how they work and what they do. So the first thing I want to talk about is Threatening Rage. This has been changed from 6.0. So in 7.0, they've changed it now that it reduces the cooldown of both your taunts by 5 seconds. It no longer gives the speed boost, and on top of that, you also get a 10% defense chance increase while under its effect, something like that. So really it's changed a lot how I use it. Now I'm looking to use it either as an offensive ability or to reduce the cooldown on my taunts. Next up, we have your Interrupt Disruption. Make sure this is on your bar and hotkeyed to something you can get to in a snap decision. Then we have Force Push. Force Push does a couple things for us. One, it pushes enemies. It can push them really far, and that's really fun. But it also resets the cooldown on our leap, so that's another important thing as well. Then we have Intercede. This one is a bit of a unique, weird ability. You jump to a friendly target, you reduce their threat, and you prevent 20% of damage taken to them for the next 6 seconds. Very useful with the lack of mobility we now have in this class to be able to occasionally jump to people. Just be warned though, it is easy to make mistakes and screw up your group if you're overusing this ability without knowing when it's a bad thing to use, especially if you're leaping to the other tank. Now we have Guard. Guard is a very useful ability. What you need to know about Guard is a couple things. First off, it prevents a player from generating as much threat. So if you have a DPS on the team who does a lot of damage and is constantly stealing threat from you, guard them, right? The other thing is whoever is guarded will take 5% less damage. And if you're inside of a PvP situation, guarded targets will have some of their damage redirected to you. Single target taunt, this is super vital, super important for the class, right? You taunt a target to make sure it looks at you for 6 seconds and nobody else. One important thing that I want to point out about taunt is if you look at the circle underneath an enemy, you can see it has a certain amount of size. Taunts will put you the highest on the threat table and give you a multiplier based on your range from the boss. So the actual range that you see displayed to tell you how far you're away from the enemy is calculated from the edge of that circle. And the actual range used for a taunt to figure out if you're melee or ranged is calculated from the center of the enemy. You don't really have to think about it too much. Just know that in general, you're going to get more threat than the current highest threat holder with your taunt, as well as having that target look at you for 6 seconds. Then we have our Threatening Scream, which is our AoE taunt. Same as a normal taunt, except that everything within 15 meters gets taunted towards you. The other thing that's kind of fun to note about taunts is in PvP environments, if you taunt players and they're not attacking you, they actually deal less damage. Okay, let's talk about the defensive abilities that we have available to us. So the first thing is you're going to have that pesky little choice that you have to take at 68 between Saber Reflect, Intimidating Roar, and Mad Dash. So let's talk about Saber Reflect first. So Saber Reflect is only able to reflect ranged force and tech attacks. That's the important thing. You cannot reflect the majority of AoE attacks, and you cannot reflect melee attacks. When you use Saber Reflect, attacks that are reflectable deal absolutely 0 damage to you, but the reflected damage does have a cap value. Also, Saber Reflect's an AoE threat gen is the best way to think about it. Intimidating Roar. This one, it actually has a passive that's really useful for tanking. Targets that are affected by Intimidating Roar deal 15% less melee and range damage for 10 seconds. Melee and range damage is white damage if you keep your fly text turned on. That's the best way to think about it. So you have to be careful, it's not going to prevent all types of damage, and certain enemies will get stunned until they take damage, which can also be very useful. Then we have Mad Dash. Mad Dash is wonderful and does so many good things once you learn how to use it correctly. While you are dashing, you are immune to all damage. So basically a 1.5 seconds of total immunity. There's a lot of single hit mechanics that you can cheese with this, and it's so satisfying when you pull it off. It's also a mobility aid, of course. Just be careful that you're not dashing into places that cause more problems for the team or get you killed. Next up, we have Invincible. Invincible is just a general all-around defensive. All damage taken is reduced by 40%. You don't have to worry about what type of damage you're taking. Generally, we're going to try and save this for Force and Tech internal elemental type of attacks, which are usually yellow damage. Then we have Saber Ward. Thanks to the Tactical Grit Teeth, we can get that cooldown exceptionally low and be able to use this a lot. This is really good against melee and ranged attacks, as it provides a 50% defense chance increase. And we're already sitting at a very high defense chance on this class, so you're going to find that 80-90% of the attacks are going to do no damage to you while Saber Ward is active, provided of course that they're melee and ranged. You additionally gain 25% damage reduction against all other types of attack. Then I'm going to skip to Inert Pain. Inert Pain is not a real defensive. Generally, you just use it as a temporary way to stay alive until your healers can get to a lower damage phase and heal you back up. That takes us to Enraged Defense. You have to be below 70% health to be able to use Enraged Defense, but it is a self-heal and it's exceptionally good when used correctly. Be very careful that you're using Enraged Defense when you're going to be taking a lot of hits, right? It's not about the total amount of damage, it's about the number of times you're going to get hit. And as a tank, there's a really good chance you're going to be using med packs and shield adrenals for additional defensive boosts, so make sure that those are on your bar as well. Now let's talk about the priority system or the rotation that we're going to be using for this class. So it is a priority system. Basically what you're going to be doing is you have a list of abilities that in that order you want to use them, right? The higher the priority, the more you want to use that ability when it's off cooldown compared to anything lower on the list. Now, because we are a tank class, it's a little bit more forgiving than DPS classes, as our main priority here is not to do damage, but to be able to keep threat on the boss and do tanking mechanics. So don't worry too much if you mess some of these up. There's no real big procs that you need to worry about things interacting with each other. So what do we have? Retaliation is the first ability that we're going to want to use. It's off the global cooldown for this class. You can use it whenever you want. Then we have our combo, Aegis Assault into Crushing Blow. Now, you don't technically always need to do this. The buff that you get from Aegis Assault lasts 20 seconds. The cooldown of Crushing Blow is 11.4 seconds, so you can not always have these two synced up. It just helps a lot though. Next up, we're going to have our Ravage. I like placing Ravage a little earlier in the rotation because it has a really good defensive attached to it. Next up we have Force Scream. It does a little bit more damage, but the defensive that we get from this is not quite as good. It's just a little barrier that absorbs some damage. Then we have Vicious Throw. Vicious Throw is your sub 30% attack. Then we want to use Saber Throw next on our list. Now technically it's not quite as damaging as Smash, so you can interchange the order of these two however you want, but Saber Throw has the benefit of giving us some extra rage. Then we have Vicious Slash, which is very low on the list. Slash though does provide this really unique thing that provides trauma. Healing received is reduced by 20%. If you are absolutely out of energy though, Assault, there's the very bottom of your priority list. As you'll notice, I have not mentioned Backhand and Force Choke. I don't like to put these on the priority system specifically. I want them to be abilities that I have available to use when I see fit, that it's the most useful, because they do a couple things. One is they can generate a high amount of threat in a short period of time for you. They also stun an enemy, and they have a very long cooldown, right? So use them when you think it's appropriate rather than trying to use them on priority. When it comes to our AoE, we have a few options here, not a ton though. Our first thing is going to be our Aegis Assault into Crushing Blow combo. If you're under the effect of Aegis Assault, which as you can see lasts about 20 seconds, then your Crushing Blow will be an AoE and it's going to be your most powerful AoE. You follow that up with Smash being your next most powerful AoE, and then Sweeping Slash is just one you can use as a filler. Generally, you're not going to be using Sweeping Slash a lot just because it does a very low amount of damage. You have to be hitting 3 targets for this to really be a good ability. If you're only hitting 2 targets, you might as well be doing single target attacks and alternating between enemies. Okay, so let's talk about the opener for this class to help you generate a high amount of threat. There are a few things that I want to talk about before we get into showing you the actual opener that you need to think about. First off is are you taking Saber Reflect? If you take Saber Reflect and you do not need to use it in the first 1 minute of the fight, you can use Saber Reflect early for some extra threat generation. Secondly, are you going to be taking War Master? Majority of the time you are taking War Master, so you will be able to use your Vicious Throw in your opener. Otherwise, you just want to replace it with the Saber Throw. And the last thing that we want to think about is placement of our taunts. So generally, nobody is going to be able to pull off of you in the first 3 GCDs of the rotation, so we can save our taunt for the 4th GCD of our rotation. And you're going to want to make sure you get your second taunt after 4 GCDs, and it's a good habit to practice overlapping your taunts from the beginning until you get used to knowing when you need it and when you don't need it. So before I show you the actual rotation, I want to give you one more thing to note about threatening rage usage. If you are in a situation where you haven't taken War Master and you can't use Vicious Throw in your opener, well, you don't need to use threatening rage for energy after the first taunt. You can actually wait until after your AoE taunt to use it, so you get the cooldown reduction on both of your taunts at the same time. So we're going to leap in, activate our Saber Reflect, we're going to use Aegis Assault for energy, Crushing Blow, we're going to use Retaliation, Taunt, use Threatening Rage, followed by a Ravage, Vicious Throw, Backhand, and then as soon as you Force Scream, you can AoE Taunt. We're going to use a Force Choke, Smash, and now we're back into just our regular priority system, and I can overlap my third taunt at this point. So that's it. That's a very high threat gen opener, while also prioritizing a defensive ramp up from different abilities that you use. From here, if you just follow the priority system that we talked about, you shouldn't have too many problems keeping threat, remembering to either use taunts occasionally if you don't need to save them for a boss mechanic, or saving them specifically for when the boss has a mechanic that makes you lose threat and you need to retaunt them. So let's leave you with a couple of other tips before we end this video. So I'm not going to go into all the stuff about tanking. I do have other guides for that, so go watch them if you're looking for more information about how to actually tank, how to get better, and so on. But you should open up your interface editor and you should make sure that you turn on target of target. This one is exceptionally useful. When you have a target selected, you get to see who they're looking at. So you know, if I'm supposed to be tanking this guy, is he looking at me or not, right? If he's not looking at you, you're not doing your job as a tank, so very useful. So it's important to make sure that you are using your taunts when the enemy looks at somebody else to bring it back to you. But generally you don't want to be wasting taunts unless you know it's a type of fight where the boss never switches targets on a scripted kind of thing. Alright, so I hope you guys really enjoyed this video. Hopefully that gives you an idea of how to play the class as a general idea of using the rotation and some of the different key abilities that you have. It's not meant to be a full-on how to be a tank guide. Definitely make sure you're watching my other videos if you want to learn how to tank so that you can get that wider depth of knowledge rather than just learning the basics of how to do the rotation, how to gear the class, and play with it. As always, have a great day, and we'll see you in the next video.